For 40 seconds, on a spring night in 1984, the most talkative man in American comedy said absolutely nothing. And a 24-year-old stage manager named Danny Foss, standing in the wings with a clipboard he'd stopped pretending to read, was the only person in the building who would ever learn why. 2,100 people sat in the dark of the Orpheum Theatre in Boston, tickets in their pockets, waiting for the next laugh. George Carlin had stopped mid-sentence, turned his head, and was staring at the very back of the room as if someone had called his name. Nobody had called his name. On stage, in front of a sold-out house that paid to laugh, 40 seconds is a small eternity, long enough to lose a career, long enough to change a man's mind about what he was even doing up there. To understand what Carlin saw in that back row, you have to go back 6 hours to a nervous kid and an empty theater. Danny Foss had been the stage manager at the Orpheum for exactly 19 days. This was the biggest name he had ever run a show for, and he had spent the whole afternoon convinced he was going to ruin it. At 6 that evening, he found Carlin already there, hours early. Not backstage, out in the empty seats, row F on the aisle, in a black t-shirt, looking up at his own empty stage. "You're early, Mr. Carlin," Danny managed. "I like to look at the room before it fills up," Carlin said, not turning around. "You learn more about a room when it's empty than when it's full. Same as people." Danny said the true thing. "This is my first big one. I don't want to screw it up for you." Carlin looked at him, and something in his face softened. "Kid, the only way you screw it up is if you stop paying attention. That's the whole job, yours and mine." He turned back to the empty seats. "Pay attention to the room." Danny thought it was just something to say. He would spend the rest of his life realizing it wasn't. By 8 o'clock, the room was no longer empty. 2,100 people, every one of them there for the same reason, to hear the sharpest mind in the country take the ordinary world apart, word by word, and hand it back funnier than they'd left it. And he was magnificent. Carlin moved through the early material like a man walking downhill, easy and fast, the laughs rolling up out of the dark in waves. The bit about stuff, "A place for my stuff, your stuff is junk, my junk is stuff," landed exactly the way 2,000 people had hoped it would. They roared. They leaned forward. They were his. Danny had grown up on these records, played them until the grooves went gray. And here was the man himself, 10 feet away, somehow better in the room than he had ever been on the turntable. 31 minutes in, Carlin started something newer about the little dishonest phrases people use to get through a day. He was 3 sentences into it. The room was still warm from the last laugh. And then he stopped. It wasn't a pause for timing. Danny knew Carlin's pauses by now, the little silences a comedian hangs a laugh on. This was not one of those. This was the sentence simply ending in the middle, the word left hanging in the air with nowhere to go. Carlin had turned his head and was looking up, past the front rows, past the middle of the house, all the way to the last row under the balcony where the light barely reached. A few people chuckled, waiting for the turn, the payoff. It didn't come. 10 seconds, the laughter died on its own. 20 seconds, somebody coughed. 30 seconds. 2,100 people had gone still together, the way a whole field of birds goes still a second before you notice the hawk. Something was happening. None of them knew what. All of them could feel it. Danny's hand was actually moving toward the house light board when Carlin lifted the microphone again. And his voice had changed. "You know," Carlin said, quiet now, the sharpness gone out of it, "I do this every night. Most nights I could do it in my sleep. Some nights I probably am." A nervous laugh, grateful for anything. "But every once in a while," he went on, "somebody comes in here who really needs it to be good tonight. Not wants, needs. And you can't always tell who. So the trick is, you do it like they're all that person." Then he did something Danny had never seen him do and would never see him do again. He walked to the edge of the stage, put a hand up to shade his eyes against the lights, and looked straight at that last row, not performing the look, doing it. And he said, gently, to one point in the dark, "You made it. Good. Stay till the end." And he went back and finished the show, sharper, kinder. The anger underneath it turned toward something, instead of just against everything. The best comedy Danny ever stood 20 feet from. But he still didn't know what any of it meant. Not yet. He found out at the merch table after. The theater had mostly emptied, but a boy was still sitting in the last row. 14, maybe 15. A suit jacket a size too big, the kind you borrow from an uncle. He hadn't moved, and beside him an empty seat with a folded program set carefully on it, like it was being saved for someone. A woman came up the aisle to collect him, a nurse, still in her scrubs under her coat. "Was that all right? Him being here?" she asked. "His brother had these tickets for months." She lowered her voice. "His brother passed 3 weeks ago, 19 years old. It was the one thing they had, the two of them, these records. He knew every word. So we came anyway. I didn't think anybody would notice one kid in the back." Danny looked at the empty seat, at the folded program set on it. He noticed, Danny thought. From 30 rows away, in the dark, in the middle of a bit, and he stopped the whole thing. "Stay till the end," Carlin had said. The boy had stayed till the end. Danny found Carlin backstage, packing his own bag, no entourage, the way he always did. "There was a kid," Danny started. "In the back, suit too big for him," Carlin said, not looking up. "Empty seat next to him with a program on it, saving it for somebody." "I know." He zipped the bag. "I saw the seat first, actually. You see a kid save a seat that stays empty all night, you don't have to be a genius to do the math." "But you were in the middle of a bit," Danny said. Carlin looked at him, and there was the whole man in it, the watcher, the one who had built a life out of seeing the things other people talked right past. "Kid, I told you this afternoon, pay attention to the room. I wasn't being poetic. There's always one person out there who's not really laughing at the joke. They're just glad to be sitting next to it." He put on his coat. "The jokes are for everybody, but the show's for that one guy in the back. Or it's not worth doing." Then he stopped at the door and, without turning around, said the thing Danny would be quoted on for the next 40 years. "Anybody can fill a room, Danny. Not everybody remembers to look at it." and he was gone. Danny Foss ran shows for another 36 years. He worked with names bigger and louder than George Carlin. He never told this story much because it didn't have a punchline. But he kept the seating chart from that night. Row U, seat 14, the boy, and 15 beside it, the seat that stayed empty. He framed it, and when a young stagehand came through, scared of the size of a name on the marquee, Danny would point at those two little boxes and tell them the job was never the lights or the cables. The job was to pay attention to the room, especially the back of it, especially the seats that stay empty. It took him until 2009 to learn who the boy was, a letter forwarded through the theater from a man in his late 30s. He had become a nurse like the aunt who brought him. For 3 weeks after his brother died, he wrote, he hadn't been able to feel anything at all, and a comedian he never met stopped an entire show, looked straight at him in the dark, and told him to stay till the end. I've stayed till the end of a lot of things since, the letter said, that I wanted to walk out of. I think I owe him that. People remember George Carlin for the 7 words, the arrests, the man who said the things you weren't allowed to say. But ask Danny what Carlin was really like, and he never told them about the anger or the famous bits. He told them about 40 seconds of silence, and a kid in a borrowed suit, and a seat that stayed empty all night. Then he'd point at the chart on his wall and say the only review of the man that ever mattered to him. He was paying attention right to the back of the room. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. It helps keep these forgotten moments alive. And tell us in the comments, have you ever felt, in a crowded room, that a performer was speaking directly to you? What was the moment?